Government organizations are here to help. How do we know this? They have names that say so.
This bit of irony is brought to you by thisiscommonsense.com. This is This Week in Common Sense, starring Paul Jacob. Paul Jacob has been writing commentary on thisiscommonsense.com since 1999. Here's Paul.
Well, it's funny that this consumer, financial protection bureau, all the names and all of these agencies and the bills, where it's the, Make America Perfect and so on, as the act, the Make America Perfect Act, which no one's yet quite introduced, but now that I've said it, they probably will. But it's almost as if we're supposed to believe that if we just name it the right thing and pass a bunch of gobbledygook, that if we do something wrong, the courts will sort it out, we being Congress that passes these things, or they'll write new regulations. And this is modern American government, is a process of the legislative branch, which is the branch that is designed to be closest to the people, regularly exporting all of their power to the executive branch, to the courts, passing feel-good legislation, sound-good legislation, saying they care about everything, every problem under the sun we're going to fix, we care about, government's here to help. And then in essence, it gets passed, it is vague, it's gives all kinds of powers to the bureaucracy to then fill in that vagueness, and then the courts sort it out as it begins to pinch people like you and me. And that is exactly what's happened with the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. It was set up to be somehow independent, so it could even police better. But at a certain point, police who can police more independently, without any checks and balances, without any accountability, become tyrants. And of course, this is Elizabeth Warren's brainchild. She came up with this as a way to solve all the problems in the financial area of our economy and make sure that greed didn't, ruin everything. And I think anybody who has seriously looked at this doesn't think there's any real difference between the risk we have today and the risk that we had before the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. And instead what we have is an agency that's out of control, like so much of the federal government. Our whole government is built on the idea that there has to be checks and balances, that you have to guard against ambition by, having other people who can weigh in. And that's why we have three branches. And it seems like that idea of limiting government and controlling government and having checks and balances has been lost in this idea that government's good for us and government can solve all our problems. And we can just write legislation that says everything's going to be wonderful and some government person will be in charge of it and they'll make it happen. And not only is that a ridiculous canard, it is also dangerous, very dangerous, because the impulse is to give this government agency or czar or what have you, heaven forbid that in America we're going to borrow Russian, dictator type language, czar, but we have. Anyway, we're going to have a czar, we're going to have an agency that we want to give more and more power because we've given them a bunch of power and they can't solve our problems. So it must be that they need more. And that's where we end up again and again and again. It is, it creates this idea that we can do anything. And if we didn't get it done, it's only because we didn't have more power and control of other people's lives. And it has led to a thing. I had mentioned how, we forget about the debt. Just we can spend any money we want to spend. It doesn't matter. On the right, you don't hear as much about it. On the left now, you have this completely insane idea of modern monetary theory, which basically stipulates that government can print money and spend as much as they want, and it's no big deal. And can you imagine that to fund the Green New Deal or to fund whatever new World War II Marshall Plan type idea these folks have, they're just going to print up the money and spend it, trillions, as if it will have no impact. And it's simply a question of time. It may not, the debt we've run up and continue to run up may not bite us for years, for decades. But sooner or later, that debt has to be paid. And you can spend money and print up money and debase your currency. But if you think that never has any impact, you need to Google Weimar Republic in Germany, monetary policy, and see what happened. Or relocate to Venezuela right now would be a good time, and ask them how the money supply is working, whether the government is just printing up money and that's working out for them. It's not working out. It's just disastrous. And when I hear people who don't believe in any limits to what government can do after a century in which we fought wars that killed over 100 million people, after the Holocaust, after Pol Pot, after all these schemes that have starved and beaten and imprisoned people all over the world, it's not true. It's not fair to say government anywhere is going to do these horrible things, but it is only sane to say that government anywhere could do these horrible things if we're not paying attention. And if we're not only, it's one thing to pay attention, you also have to have some levers, some ways, some democratic checks and balances. The election process is a nice thing, but also initiative and referendum and the ability to organize politically. That's why something that most of the major media didn't seem to think was much of a big deal when the Tea Party groups couldn't form because the IRS basically wouldn't give them their status as organizations that are nonprofit. That's the kind of thing that to me reminds me of the blogger who's arrested and imprisoned in Egypt, or the types of things that are going to happen in the Soviet Union if you decide you want to run against Putin. These are serious things, and it's not as if that's a case in which it was the Obama IRS. I don't think Obama picked up the phone and said, "Hey, screw over Tea Party groups." I think you had apparatchiks in the government who took that upon themselves. And again, it's not about, boy, the Democrats always do this, but the Republicans are perfect, or the Republicans always do that, but the Democrats are perfect. This is the nature of people and power. We've seen it a zillion times throughout all of history. Don't give government power that's not accountable back to the people. On Tuesday, I had a somewhat lighthearted, kind of poking fun at what was happening in Iraq and concerning Iran, and the killing of the Iranian commander and all the stuff that hit the fan this week. But I just was so tickled by the idea that the Iraqi parliament would get together and say, it's time for the Americans to leave. And of course, please don't throw us in that briar patch. Don't make us leave your beautiful country. Do we really have to go back to the United States and hang out at the mall or the park? Come on. So I would have loved that to happen. And of course, if you read the headlines this week, it did happen. The Iraqi parliament asked us to leave. It's time for the Americans to leave. They passed a resolution. And then I realized, as much success or lack thereof, with the complete lack of any success in training, not only the Afghan military, but the Iraqi military, and nation building, which is admittedly not easy stuff. But the lack of success for that, yet the nation builders can be proud that they have an Iraqi parliament. What is it? The Council of Representatives, I think is the name of it, which basically looks so much like the U.S. Congress in that this resolution, which showed that they're getting tough and they're saying, look, you guys get out of here, was a non-binding resolution. Now, first, it has to be signed by the prime minister, and they don't have a prime minister because the prime minister just resigned and there isn't one. So it can't even be a full-fledged resolution. But then it also is non-binding. So it's not really saying, which they could say at any time, hey, it's time for the U.S. to leave. And I hope they will, because I think it is time for the U.S. to leave. I think it's long past time for the U.S. to leave. And people sometimes, they might say, well, wow, you're just going to leave ISIS to, and of course now ISIS has largely been defeated, at least thrown to the four corners of the Middle East. But the reality is the United States was never necessary to defeat ISIS. It was never our fight. You've got a Shia government in Iraq controlling a lot of Sunni territory in Iraq, and you've got the civil war in Syria, and a lot of Sunnis in Syria who don't really want to be part of an Alawite government out of Damascus. And so it wasn't hard for a Sunni rebellion to form. Problem was that it was a pretty insane Sunni rebellion. That kind of is a recurring theme with some of the rebellions in the Middle East. But hey, let's keep trying, because the governments that they're working with are dictatorial and horrible. And so, a revolution in the Middle East, you almost don't have to ask, where. It's got to be a good thing. And then you realize that the maxim, it can always get worse, is true. And maybe it's not a good thing. But anyway, these governments throughout the Middle East need to fall. They just need to fall to people who will build something better. But anyway, the idea that they would do this big dog and pony show to, in essence, look like they were being tough with the Americans at the same time that they don't want the Americans to leave. And of course, some Shiite legislators probably do want the U.S. to leave, but others don't. And of course, it's all in their self-interest. The U.S. helps some groups more than others. If you're more aligned with Iran, you probably want them to leave. But the protesters in Iraq have been very clear for weeks before kind of the fight between Iran and the U.S. took off, that they wanted both Iran out and the U.S. There's a lot of people in Iraq who do not like what are Iranian-backed Shia militias, and but the bottom line to all this is that can be sorted out with us in the middle of it, or that can be sorted out without us in the middle of it. And frankly, not only do I not want to be in the middle of it, because I really like Americans, even soldiers I don't know, I still don't want them to be in some mess like that and get killed or maimed or hurt in any way. Or we cannot be in the middle of it, and what's going to happen? Well, there's some argument to say, it's not good things aren't happening now. So what bar are you going to hold any sort of change policy to? But the reality is, had we not gone in and gotten ISIS, in time, I think Sunni countries like Turkey or Saudi Arabia, others could come and do something. And wouldn't that be better, that it didn't depend on this foreign power? And even though they are foreign powers, they're at least in the neighborhood, and that it's Muslim controlled country versus Muslim, lunatics as far as ISIS. Isn't that better than the mostly Christian, at least in the view of the Middle East, a Christian country, the United States, getting in the middle of it? And it strikes me that if the goal is a Middle East that's more peaceful, we should have backed off. If the goal was to be there so that we would have more say-so in how oil is determined in other financial arrangements that might take place with those governments, well then, yeah, we need to be there. So if you are making a ton of money, any of you out there listening to me, if you are making a fortune in selling stuff in the Middle East, if you have interest in all that oil in such a way that you think it might be worth someone's life, then I understand why you are joining a special brigade to go invade the Middle East. And I don't know if I wish you well, but I'm glad that you're going and you're not expecting U.S. soldiers to do your dirty work for you. So that's the most interesting thing, though, Tim. And we do these videos, and I'm talking to you as and you've edited these pieces, and we've worked on them somewhat together. And so I think sometimes people out there in YouTube land or wherever are wondering, who the hell is this guy talking to? Because you don't show up very often. But anyway, as you know, later in the week, all of a sudden the United States Congress is going, and they're going to pass a war powers resolution that will hem in the president. And of course, my favorite people in Congress, Mike Lee from Utah, Rand Paul from Texas, both very libertarian, especially Rand Paul.
Isn't he Tennessee?
What am I saying? His dad's from Texas. He's from Kentucky.
Kentucky. Okay. Those are all two states that just one state, in my opinion.
That's right. But anyway, I agree with them. I agree with my Senator Tim Kaine here in Virginia, who's a Democrat. I don't agree with him on much, but I agree with him on Congress playing a bigger role in controlling, again, checks and balances. I noticed that, and I'm going to forget, I think it's Matt Gaetz is his name, and I may have butchered it, from Florida, another rep who's been very much defending Trump in what he did in this case in Iraq and Iran, and generally very much defending Trump, but who voted with the Democrats on this measure. Interesting thing is there were a number of Republicans, 6 I think it was, who voted with, maybe it was 4, who voted with the Democrats on the War Powers resolution. There were 8 Democrats who voted with Republicans, who largely voted against it. But my problem with it wasn't Congress trying to assert its authority. And of course, Congress could assert its authority in ways that are very detrimental. So I don't want to say, gee, anytime Congress is asserting its authority against the president, that they're making the right call. But we have a system. And if we're going to have a republic instead of an empire, which is, I think, an open question these days, if we're going to have a republic, the Constitution, the law of that republic, is that the Congress is the ultimate authority on whether we're going to war or not. And one man cannot take us to a war that the people of the United States do not want. And the reason that one man can't is because Congress are representatives. I know I'm talking theoretically here and not maybe reality based, but they're supposed to be our representatives, and they're supposed to say no. So I want that check and balance so desperately. I think we're extended all over the world in a very foolish and dangerous and costly way. And so I want to stop that. At the same time, I don't want to say the word because my mom always told me not to say those words, but this is BS. This is Congress doing a resolution they know has no force. If both houses of Congress, and of course the Senate's probably not going to go along with it anyway, but if both houses of Congress pass this thing, it has no effect. It has absolutely no effect. And I listened on the radio, stuck in traffic the other day, on a C-SPAN radio station, to Nancy Pelosi explaining how they passed this resolution as part of the War Powers Act, which allows Congress to pass resolutions like this. Well, the War Powers Act also has no prohibition against you jumping in the lake. But to argue that jumping in the lake is somehow part of this official process of the War Powers Act the reality is she was doing something completely feckless, completely a PR stunt that had no impact. Had she wanted it to be real, she could have pushed for real legislation. Now, the problem is Trump would have vetoed it. Well, make him veto it. We got an election in November. And maybe it's a losing issue. Back off if you think it's a losing issue. But if you care about the country like you say you do, then you would push it and you would make him use his power to block you. And then you would point to good people all across the country and say, see, this is where I am and this is where the Democrats are. We want something different. He's not allowing us to check him. That's why you have to give us a bigger majority in the legislature. That's why we need to elect somebody else to be president, and then let the people decide. So they were doing exactly what the Iraqi legislature was doing, a completely impotent political move designed only to get a little story in the paper and to pretend to your electorate that you were doing something that you were not. And that's way too much of our politics. And politics everywhere, frankly, and why people hate politics. On Wednesday, we talked about, speaking of insane politics, I think one of the most frightening aspects of our current situation politically is that the insanity has escaped beyond the bounds of policymakers and experts and politicians and is now much more all over academia, all over other parts of our lives like social media and so on. And this new idea, which smacks right into the First Amendment. The First Amendment says it is critical that people be able to say what they think and express themselves. How you can look at the history of the world and not understand how absolutely essential that is beyond me. But we live in a day and time in which somehow we think we need to set up some sort of commissions and juntas to decide, who can speak out and you're going to be fired or ostracized or canceled if you don't say things the way that we want you to say them. And we talked about the case of Catherine West Lowry, who was a professor at the University of Massachusetts Amherst, and she had shown one of these Hitler going crazy rants from the movie Downfall, which is a great film, a German film, and but about Hitler. And you've seen these. Everybody's seen these dozens of times. It seems like I've seen them more times than I really want to see them anymore. But it's kind of funny because you've got Hitler in German, saying all these things and going, just on an incredible rant. And of course, then they always put different words in there. And she did that, or she didn't do it. This was actually a student's video that had been produced for the class. It's an economics class or accounting, and so she showed that student's video as an idea of some of the different videos that have been shown. And apparently there were complaints because the administration said we've received complaints and ended up letting this woman go. Now, one, it's really, really hard to imagine how anybody would complain. I mean, the world is full of so many things that need to be changed that if this is what you're focused on, you've got a real problem. So it's just hard to believe that anyone could complain about it. But another reason it's hard to believe that anyone could complain about it is that we've had past cases. Jordan Peterson, who had a woman had shown a Jordan Peterson video at a university in Canada. The name escapes me at the moment, but and she had gotten in all kinds of trouble because there were complaints about that video that she had shown. And the administration, boy, they were going to do something about that after all these people had complained. Except it turned out there weren't any complaints. There weren't any people out there who complained. There weren't any people in her classroom who said, I'm not going to sit for this. I'm complaining to the administration. The hit on her came from the administration, who lied about receiving complaints. And I just asked, is this another case of that? I'd sure like to see the complaints and see some real documentation that there were any complaints, because I think increasingly that's being used as a foil for a bunch of cultural revolution lunatics to control what everyone says, anyone on their campus. And that is, it's the sort of thing that I think for most of us, we're not on college campuses. I'm sure there are campuses where this is not as much of a problem as other campuses. But it's seeping outside of the campus, and more in our political discussions, what people can say, who can say it. Campaign finance is a way to try to out people and force people who are talking about issues, even when it has nothing to do with candidates running for office, to have to disclose. So maybe then they can be, attacked in different ways. This is the wrong direction. And we talk about it quite a bit because, we lose the fight over free speech. That's the whole war. That's the whole war.
I have a theory about why this is happening. I have a lot of theories. I mean, I don't want to say I just have one. That would be
liar,
unjust to me. Yeah, unjust to me. But one of those theories is that the reason they have to attack, let's say, a downfall video. This is a Hitler video, right? I mean, this is making fun of. It's partly making fun of Hitler, but it's also doing whatever the parody or satire is. It's making fun of the subject in a humorous way. But the reason they have to do it, I think, is because they don't have a good argument against Hitler. One of the reasons they have these weird ideas about free speech is they don't have a good idea for why do we have free speech? They don't have good arguments, so they come up with hysterical overreach.
Yes, it's almost like they want you to know that you're supposed to hate Hitler, but they're too afraid to explain why Hitler was a bad guy, as if you might not get it. But of course, we discussed this some this week when we were working on this commentary, and I think it's not that they don't know why Hitler's bad. I think they recognize there are similarities between what they are proposing and Hitler. He was a National Socialist. It doesn't mean that everyone who's a socialist is a Nazi and a murderer of mass proportions. That's not the argument I'm making. But I am making the argument that there are similarities between their idea of how government should function, the level of power that government should have, the way the economy should be structured, the importance of unions and whether unions should be free unions or government-controlled unions. There's all kinds of similarities between socialism and National Socialism. Surprise, surprise. You'd think the words might cause people to see some of that. But I think that's the problem. It's not now. You're never going to hear a socialist call what Hitler was proposing National Socialism. It's Nazism. And those are supposed to be mirror opposites. And of course, they're not mirror opposites. They're on the same end of the spectrum, which is government as totalitarian as could be conceived at the time. It is a situation where, and I see this in other parts of news media, that oftentimes we are not told the facts and asked to make a decision on them and judge them. We are told the conclusion that we should come to, and then we are given facts that support that conclusion. And it seems to me that the media has become completely narrative driven. And of course, you could, any liberal can see that narrative driven media by turning on Fox. But somehow they can't see it when they turn on MSNBC or CNN or NBC or ABC or read the Washington Post or the New York Times. I see it. I see it on both ways, but they don't see it. And I think that's part of what the socialists are doing here is we just, Hitler needs to be obliterated from history as opposed to properly understood, because obliterating from history does not help us stop the next Hitler. And there's a lot of never again, but it's happened again and again and again. I mean, let's be real. We're going to have more dictators come up in different countries and do terrible things. And we've got to find a way to stop them. And we're going to have countries that are not dictatorships, where people who have power that's not checked at that time do terrible things. I mean, it seems to me that the beauty of our founders a long time ago was to realize how corrupt power becomes, and to also realize that you're not going to change human nature to solve that problem. You're going to have to structure government in a way in which the excesses check each other, and in which people who don't have a vested interest in the bridge project over this river or that land way out in Alaska or what have you are able to check those people who are in power and who are fighting to get this goodie or that goodie. So we also were able to have a little fun this week illuminating, amplifying Ricky Gervais, who did the Golden Globes, and who said, I think, opening it up, what everyone would like to say if they can't help themselves and are going to watch one of these award shows, and that is, come on already. No one wants to hear your political statement. You have no more, cachet when it comes to politics than any other person watching. Enough already. And of course, it didn't stop anything. Michelle Williams was, talked on and on about abortion. But this has become kind of standard practice, and it strikes me as so funny because, of course, I grew up in a time in which there were 3 television stations. Almost everybody was watching the same thing. You you didn't want to do things that were going to irk large segments of your audience, because it wasn't the sort of thing where the audience is split 7,000 different ways. And so if you can grab, 10% of the audience, wow, you have it made. You were trying to grab 51% of the audience, or 43, or whatever it was, with 3 different stations. And now we really, it just is constant that, there's just shows I think a lot of people don't want to watch because it's constant bickering and all one way. I mean, I think there's, I watched the Daily Show back when Jon Stewart was doing it. There was a lot of stuff I laughed at. And Jon Stewart and I don't agree on a whole lot in politics. We agree on some. But I mean, I didn't have to agree politically with every joke he told to find a lot of it funny. I mean, I can laugh at jokes about libertarians. We do some funny things. But we really, when I watched like a Samantha Bee, which was about a 2-minute ordeal before I flipped the channel. But I mean, this is just one-sided, completely vicious type, humor, I guess. But it's all political. And you look at, I have for years been amazed. And again, I'm a libertarian. Admittedly, I have voted Democratic, but not very often. I've voted for a few Democrats through the years, mostly Republicans, oftentimes looking for an independent who maybe chained himself to the Capitol or something, something that would tell me this guy wasn't going to destroy the country if he was elected. I say that about chaining himself to the Capitol because years ago, one of my first elections in Arkansas, It was a Republican who I did not like at all running against Bill Clinton. And I told my brother, I can't vote for either one of these guys. And then there's this other guy, I don't know anything about him. And my brother said, I don't know anything about him either, but he chained himself to the Capitol one time. And I thought, well, that's good enough for me. I mean, anyway. So where are we headed with that?
Yeah, I'm not sure because Michelle Williams' speech was not exactly funny.
No. Well, no, hers was a very serious plea for women to vote in their interest. But what she meant by that is for women to vote as if what women wanted was the only thing that you needed to be concerned about, because that's how men have always voted. But of course, that's not how men have always voted. It's not how women vote either. We don't vote for our sex or our gender against the other gender. I mean, that's insane. I've got a wife and 3 daughters. Am I really interested in a world in which the people I love don't get anything they want? And that's not how the world works. This is really it's pitiful, and it's been said more and more. There was, I can't remember, we did a commentary about it. I don't know, I can't remember who said it, but somebody, it may have been Kamala Harris. If it wasn't, I apologize for bringing up her name, but who made the argument that, and was speaking to basically people of color, which is everyone, if you think about it, because peach and white and tan is a color too, but beside the point. But was basically saying, vote for your race. Vote along racial lines. Vote for what you think will help your race the most. And of course, when you think about the issues in our world, most of them don't break down that way. And the whole idea that you would not, that somehow you have to vote according to some category, as if every person who's female thinks the same way, or every person who's white or black thinks the same way. It's pitiful stuff. And what's also, I think, somewhat wrong there is it has said to a lot of the country, these shows aren't for you. Hollywood isn't for you. Movies aren't for you. I know very few conservatives, especially religious conservatives, who don't like to see sex and vicious language and just talk about things that they view as immoral constantly. I don't know how they go to the movies. I mean, there are very few movies that I want to go to a movie theater and sit down. The risk that they're going to say things or show things that are just, that you see as just beyond the pale are very high. And yet, I think there's a large segment of the country who they see that that's what they wanted to see maybe, or certainly it's no big deal. And so you see what's happening, and that's been happening for years, that the media has been separated, and that in essence, there's not, I mean, if you're liberal and you want to listen to talk radio, it's not very easy, because there's not many shows that are playing to you. As Laura Ingraham once said, which isn't true, but what I thought was funny anyway, she said, the reason conservatives tend to dominate talk radio is because people listen to it going to and from a job. Oh, she's something. But anyway, but that's the way Hollywood has been, and it does create. There are a bunch of different movies where the president, is doing something. Every president in any movie made in Hollywood is the same political position. He's liberal, wants to be more liberal, but doesn't understand that that's the way to go. He's worried politically that the country's not with him. And the theme is always be more liberal, a lot more liberal, and then the world will be a better place. And I use liberal meaning socialist for the most part. And so, that sort of thing just says to, I think, a lot of people who are conservative, movies aren't for me. I'm not going to be represented there. So it's not too surprising that when they all get together, then it's kind of a let's talk bad about the rest of the country that doesn't have the same views. I did a commentary on Friday anticipating the election Saturday, the 11th of January in Taiwan. And their president, who is the first female president in the country, is running for re-election. She has been very strong in wanting to let China know they are not buckling under for any one China, two systems BS. They've seen what happened in Hong Kong, and they didn't even need to see it to know the intentions of the CCP in China. And so this election it's interesting because she has come from being down. They've had some economic slowdowns and different things. They're under a lot of pressure economically from China, and her support was really low. Different polls showing it as low as 25, 15%. This was about a year ago. And what China has done in Hong Kong has really, really been a big factor in this election from what I read and the polling I have seen from different articles. And her opponent is someone who wants closer relations with China. The way Taiwan kind of works, there's a lot of unspokenness. Many people in Taiwan, I think the majority, want an independent nation of Taiwan and China be gone. We're not part of China. The truth is, historically, Taiwan has not always been part of China, has never been part of a unified China in the sense that it would be if China somehow took it over. And then there are the folks who came over with Chiang Kai-shek, and not all of these folks are responsible, obviously, but Chiang Kai-shek came over from China, having been defeated by Mao, basically took over Taiwan and ruled, he and his son afterwards, ruled under martial law for 4 decades. And I don't mean martial law where, gee, sorry, we have to have martial law. We would never really torture or incarcerate or detain or threaten people. No, with all of that. And a really terrible time. And so Taiwan came out of that and is now the only Chinese-speaking area that's ever had a free election, and has initiative and referendum, democratic checks and balances. I was lucky enough to visit there this year. What a neat place. And, culturally different in all kinds of ways, but bright people, 87% of whom speak English, as well as Chinese, and some Taiwanese, which are kind of a dialect, and so on. But it's a neat place, and it's a place that is so far ahead of other places in Asia in terms of freedom and democratic processes, and so the idea that they should somehow get closer to China and accept some sort of one China, two systems crap is ridiculous. And this whole year, what's happened in Hong Kong, and for a lot of it, there was talk about how these are rioters and they're turning the public off. And then back in November, they voted in Hong Kong in local elections, and pro-democracy candidates who had never really run for office before took 87% of the seats. So it just showed how popular the rebellion against Beijing in Hong Kong was. And of course, the people of Taiwan understand, we're likely next. And if we didn't have this 100 miles of Pacific Ocean, the Taiwan Strait between us and mainland China, we probably had already have been taken over. And so it's been a huge issue. I'm hopeful that on Saturday, that she will be reelected and I think it'll send a message again that that what's right has already been determined. Every Democratic vote has gone against China. Anybody who cares about human rights knows that what they're trying to do is not right. And I used Friday's commentary to have a little fun with that, and just it was entitled "Tough Time for Tyrants," and I just kind of wondered out loud, how much guff do these poor leaders of China have to put up with from all these loudmouth, liberty-loving people who are going to complain and complain. Oh, we don't like it that they repress people in Hong Kong. Oh, there's concentration camps. I mean, these are re-education centers. And maybe there's a million or so Uyghurs in those centers. But don't believe the secret documents that have been released that show that there's torture and so on. These are nice, wonderful places. And then highlighted what I found to be just a really interesting story. This guy called the Potter King, and I would tell you his Chinese name, but I'd probably butcher it. So, but he's known as the Potter King, and he's got a huge following in Taiwan. And he's speaking a language I don't understand, but just seeing it looks like fun on the video. So the Potter King invites President Tsai of Taiwan onto his program, and of course he calls her President Tsai because that's her name and that's her position. Oh no, you can't. The Chinese government, I suspect, but it was the Chinese company. YouTube is not allowed in China; it's banned, and so he has 500,000 YouTube followers and subscribers in Taiwan. But of course, they can't in China. They can't see him. But he has this company that is a Chinese company that has been, basically marketing his program in China to a lot of success. Well, they cut him off, and they're not going to let him do anything. And the whole reason being that he should have known better than to say President Tsai, because to say that would imply that Taiwan is an independent sovereign nation, for heaven's sake. So it is just unbelievable the degree that the rulers of China, Xi is becoming more and more a one-man dictator. But the butchers of Beijing, whether it's butchers or one butcher who's head and shoulders, no pun intended, above the rest, they don't believe. Well, I should put it a different way. They do believe that they should be able to silence anyone, anywhere. And they are using 1.3 billion customers who they control as subjects, slaves in a totalitarian society, to not only control their own country in that vicious way, but to dictate what people in the United States say and what people in Australia say, and using their economic clout and their control over their own population to leverage the rest of the world. And as I have said before, I'm not one of these people who believe, oh, let's just find some enemy somewhere and focus all our attention on them so that America can ride the waves across the world and control everything. I think America has made many mistakes. I don't want America to control the world. I don't want any nation to control the world. But the danger that you see in China to their own people and to their neighbors, like Taiwan, good people have to stand up. And the idea, I hate to think of such tyranny anywhere, but especially having seen that country and seeing just how it's not just people with, and some of the videos you see of some of the campaign ads have been wonderful because she's emphasizing the freedom that they have, that we just want our quiet lives of being free. and they show different scenes. And of course, having been there, I've been on some of those streets. It is a vibrant, happy place that you just, and that's nice to see. Asia needs more places like that. The whole world needs more places like that. And the thought that they could be just stamped out and put into some totalitarian box, that's what Hong Kong's fighting. That's what Taiwan's fighting. And as we have the message of this program, that's what we're all fighting. If you think that, when I think it was Martin Luther King who said an injustice anywhere is an injustice everywhere, it leads to that. If you want to be free in the United States of America, you've got a dog in the fight, because you want Taiwan to be free, and you want Hong Kong to be free, and you want freedom to be expanding to China, not totalitarianism to be coming from China to you. And so bless Taiwan. Let's hope that they vote in such a way that it's further tough times for the tyrants in Beijing. Hey, do not forget this podcast and video every weekend at SoundCloud and at Stitcher and at thisiscommonsense.com, of course.